Have you ever heard the legend of the happiest herder in Arabia? The tale states that a goat herder in 9th century Ethiopia, Kaldi, noticed his goats energetically frolicking around after ingesting a mysterious plant. Upon investigation, Kaldi found his goats were eating unfamiliar red berries, and he decided to try them himself. He was hit with a rush of energy and began to frolic with his goats. Later on, a group of passing monks observed the energetic shepherd and his prancing herd and decided to investigate. Upon indulging in the berries, the monks found it much easier to stay awake and engage in prayer and philosophy. They then dried and boiled the berries to make what we now know as coffee. Today, caffeine has the stigma around it of being a drug. However, there's an argument to be made that it is actually a nutrient. Dr. Ray Peat has argued that the relative lack of knowledge surrounding human physiology and nutrition has blurred the line between nutrients and drugs. The definition of a nutrient states that a lack of said nutrient is causative of a specific disease, but we still have difficulty assigning causality and defining what a disease actually is. He also suggests that any vitamin or mineral can have a drug-like effect if used in isolation. Combine this with the fact that certain nutrients thought to be essential may actually not be, the line between nutrients and drugs is unclear.
The combination of tobacco and marijuana is wonderful.
I mean, would you consider, say, music a drug? It does in fact have a measured physiological effect when introduced to the body, and it's not natural. Only difference is if you don't listen to music, people will think you're some type of psychopath, whereas if you don't drink coffee, people don't really care. Even if you aren't willing to buy into the idea that caffeine isn't a nutrient and is in fact a drug, does it really matter? At the end of the day, if something makes you feel better, and feel better for the right reason, why would you not include it in your life? Typically, drugs we think of as bad, like cocaine, lead to problems by having negative effects on the dopamine receptors, causing people to become less motivated by natural sources of pleasure like exercise and sex. However, caffeine has the opposite effect, acting as a dopamine sensitizer by increasing receptor availability. This means that over time, caffeine intake may actually make you more motivated to do other things, while Coke, not so much. So then why do some people feel like they're dependent on coffee? Well, because they are. So many people today do not have well-functioning metabolisms, and it's likely they are subconsciously making the decision to drink coffee as a way of restoring this biological balance. It wouldn't be unique to humans either. Animals of all kind in the wild have been observed to self-medicate to alleviate an abnormality. The most common example of this would be a dog that eats grass, which can help defecate or vomit out intestinal parasites. There is still a stigma around coffee in the health community. I've even been guilty of this myself, calling out coffee drinkers in previous videos for needing it to get through their day. Truth be told, if you feel better with coffee in your life, there's little reason to ditch it, but plenty of reasons to keep it. For example, you may have read online to avoid coffee if you have adrenal issues because caffeine spikes stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. However, caffeine taken consistently over just 3 days nearly abolishes the stress hormone response, so it's likely that this is at worst temporary. However, coffee is more than just caffeine. Coffee extract has been shown to actually inhibit the synthesis of cortisol from its much weaker precursor cortisone. In a study where the subjects were given coffee, not an isolated caffeine supplement, they saw no increase in cortisol at all. The authors concluded that post-coffee salivary alpha amylase increase without a concomitant cortisol increase may also indicate that coffee may have some anti-stress properties. I've seen this video by Tommy D all about how caffeine causes insulin resistance and how it's a good thing. While he's correct that caffeine does this acutely, I don't know of many people who drink coffee for 1 day and then never touch it again. Chronic caffeine administered to animals was actually able to reverse insulin resistance caused by a high seed oil diet. To be honest, a lot of people claim that caffeine hinders your ability to burn carbohydrates. However, the longest study ever done on coffee consumption showed that subjects had improvements in their response to 75 grams of glucose without an increase in insulin levels. The main way by which coffee works a lot of its magic is by increasing metabolic rate, and more importantly, metabolic efficiency. Essentially, there are an obscene amount of steps required to fully extract all of the energy from the food you eat. A diminished capacity in any one of these steps will lead to a decrease in metabolic efficiency, and there's a ton of things that could potentially go wrong along the way. This seems to be the basis for not only most clinical diseases, but many subclinical abnormalities as well. The most obvious example of this would be the Warburg effect in cancer cells, a preference for these cells to burn glucose into lactic acid instead of fully oxidizing it to produce carbon dioxide and water. When this happens, only a fraction of the potential energy from the glucose is harvested. However, even things that may be considered inherent to one's personality can be traced back to inefficient metabolism. One such example is that of aggression. Scientists were baffled to discover that inhibiting insects' capability to perform oxidative metabolism, forcing them to instead produce lactic acid, caused them to be incredibly aggressive. One of the researchers stated, "It was a counterintuitive finding because these genes were downregulated. You tend to think of aggression as requiring more energy, not less." An ethically questionable study took subjects with a history of domestic violence and gave them intravenous lactic acid infusions. Lactic acid itself is known to interfere with efficient energy metabolism, and the infusion caused these people to go into intense rage and panic. They documented one subject's response in great detail, saying, "He reported experiencing a number of physical symptoms: deep breathing, gritting of his teeth, tenseness in his face, agitation, as well as feelings of confusion, panic, and a fear that he did not know what he was going to do. During the infusion, he initially felt like the police were after him, and he had a desire to run, i.e. panic. However, several minutes later, he felt like it was too late to run. At this point, he reported an intense urge to yell, curse, and throw things. He stated that, quote, 'This is how I feel when I hit my girlfriend.'" So yeah, having an efficient energy metabolism is going to be key for your health and overall sanity. However, if they decide to give these individuals a cup of joe instead, they may have been ready to hug their girlfriends.
I don't know what happened with this fellow. I'm just saying.
Nothing. We had coffee.
Coffee supports efficient energy metabolism in a multitude of ways. At the simplest level, coffee is actually a really good source of both magnesium and vitamin B1. Magnesium is crucial to energy production since ATP cannot be actually used for energy without magnesium being bound to it. Vitamin B1, or thiamine, is also necessary for the efficient, complete breakdown of glucose into energy. In fact, thiamine's role in energy production is so profound that it has even been used successfully in certain trials of chronic fatigue. Outside of providing some of the key raw materials needed for energy production, coffee also helps stimulate the production of energy.
Speed it up a little!
For example, the enzyme responsible for the final step in ATP creation, appropriately named the ATPase, has significantly greater activity with caffeine. The step just before that involves an enzyme that may be inhibited by the molecule nitric oxide. This causes the entire system to become backed up, resulting in lower energy production. In studies where people were fed high amounts of nitrates, the precursor to nitric oxide, resting energy expenditure declines pretty significantly. Nitric oxide is one of the golden children of mainstream health gurus, since it is used for vasodilation and thus lowers blood pressure. However, as all things in life, it exists on a bell curve, and it looks like a lot of people actually have too much nitric oxide. However, consuming coffee is one of the best ways to lower your nitric oxide. But that means you'll get high blood pressure. No, Robert Lustig, nitric oxide is not the sole mediator of blood pressure. In fact, one study even found a direct relationship between coffee consumption and lower blood pressure, with those drinking 9 or more cups per day having the lowest blood pressure. Again, having a healthy blood pressure is mostly a function of having a proper metabolism. Coffee's effects on metabolism seem to mirror those of thyroid hormone, acting as a thyroid surrogate of sorts. Considering that most of the population suffers with suboptimal thyroid function, this could be one reason why caffeine is the most widely used drug on the planet. Caffeine consumption tends to lower thyroid stimulating hormone, a precursor thyroid hormone. Suppression of TSH tends to be induced by the active thyroid hormones, suggesting that caffeine can compensate for low thyroid function. This is corroborated by the fact that coffee drinkers have a lower incidence of thyroid disease than non-drinkers. Caffeine, like thyroid hormones, act opposingly to another misguided media darling, serotonin. While caffeine and thyroid tend to increase metabolism, excess serotonin plays a role in reducing metabolism, so much so that serotonin is strategically employed to induce hibernation in wild animals. Needless to say, if you are a human being in today's society, the last thing you want to do is to be in a state of pseudo-hibernation due to excess serotonin. Yet again, coffee proves to be protective in this aspect, having the ability to acutely reduce serotonin by promoting its uptake in neurons. In this way, caffeine acts in stark contrast to the popular selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, used as prescription antidepressants. One mouse model found that caffeine was significantly more effective at reducing the symptoms of depression than the SSRIs tested. Many people, including myself, can attest to the fact that coffee can quickly and effectively elevate your mood and outlook. In this sense, coffee can quite literally be a lifesaver. One of the reasons why coffee wakes you up is because it acts as a blocker for the adenosine receptors in your brain. Higher adenosine signals tiredness, so it accumulates in the brain over the course of the day. Interestingly, in one study looking at psychiatric inpatients, total adenosine levels were significantly higher in all of the mental disorders compared to healthy controls, suggesting another potential role for coffee in mental health. Coffee's benefit on the mind go beyond simply being in a better mood. There's actually a scientific reason why it's such a cliche for people to be carrying around cups of coffee at the office. Caffeine has been shown to improve cognitive performance in a multitude of ways. It can reduce reaction time and improve vigilance, meaning you won't have quite the same urge to take a break from work so you can binge watch some Analyze and Optimize. You'll also be more focused, and because of this, you will even have an improved memory, a possible explanation for why coffee drinkers tend to have a lower incidence of neurodegenerative disease. One study actually analyzed the effects of coffee in a work simulation environment. A coffee containing just 50 milligrams of caffeine was enough to boost performance in the categories of planning, creative thinking, adaptive thinking, and all categories of memory. Keep in mind that a typical cup of Joe has around double that amount of caffeine. It seems like we are always in the search of the latest and greatest ways to level up our work quality, but there's a reason why coffee has been the quintessential performance enhancer for centuries. It works. Speaking of performance enhancers, caffeine's effects on exercise capability are potent enough that the most elite athletic competition in existence, the Olympics, ran urine tests for it up until 2004. The NCAA to this day still has caffeine on the banned substances list. Since adenosine has a depressant effect on the central nervous system, blocking out this signal gives caffeine its stimulating nature. This can cause the perception of effort to be significantly less during a high-intensity workload, and consequently will also lead to a better workout quality. You don't need to snort a line of C4 pre-workout to get the most out of your training. A cup of coffee will do the trick. Coffee's noticeable benefits on your mentality cannot be separated from its effects on the gut. Now more than ever, researchers are learning the connections between the digestive tract and the brain, calling the gut the second brain. While many health advocates on the web will be quick to tell you how coffee isn't good for your gut, this isn't your average everyday wellness advice. This is advanced wellness advice. The first and most obvious way that coffee can help your gut is by keeping you regular. Once you've digested and extracted what you need from your food, it should be expelled pronto. Letting stools stay in your intestines where it gets to marinate and continue to release toxins and microbes is less than ideal for your overall health. The ability to eliminate this waste from within you is a process requiring a symphony of energetically intensive processes. So intuitively, it makes sense that something supporting energy-producing processes could help. Infrequent bowel movements is one of the classic symptoms of hypothyroidism, indicating a systemic energy insufficiency. No, Patrick, eating more fiber is not the answer to proper defecation. Coffee also helps support a central process in digestion, creating adequate stomach acid levels. One of Big Pharma's greatest scams is convincing people that they have too much stomach acid, leading to heartburn and other problems. However, in practice, it seems that the opposite is true. Dr. Jonathan Wright explains in his book, Why Stomach Acid is Good for You. When we carefully test people over age 40 who are having heartburn, indigestion, and gas, over 90% of the time we find that they have inadequate acid production by the stomach. He goes on to mention, in 24 years of nutritionally oriented practice, I've worked with thousands of individuals who have found the cause of their heartburn and indigestion to be low stomach acidity. In nearly all these folks, symptoms have been relieved and digestion improved when they've taken supplemental hydrochloric acid. It's also worth mentioning that as we age, our stomachs tend to produce less stomach acid. This acid is incredibly important for proper digestion and assimilation of protein and various nutrients, as well as killing pathogens. Acid output is decreased by hypothyroidism, and once again, coffee can act as a helpful replacement, stimulating the production of stomach acid. A central mechanism of dysfunction is systemic inflammation originating in the gut. This can happen when bacteria cross through the cells of the immune system due to increased permeability, and enter the blood where the immune system initiates a response. This permeability, commonly referred to as leaky gut, is often associated with hypothyroidism, suggesting once again that caffeine can be helpful. Coffee is unique, since even decaffeinated coffee has been shown to increase the expression of the tight junction proteins that keep the gut lining sealed up like it should be. However, if this lining is permeable and bacteria do escape into the blood, the liver has the remarkable ability to rapidly detoxify their inflammatory stimuli. Thus, the health of the liver is paramount to being able to lower systemic inflammation. Luckily, coffee is known to stimulate the burning of fat in the liver, even to the point of reversing fatty liver disease in mice forced to slug corn oil. Poor little guys. Considering most of the population is suffering from some amount of liver fat accumulation, coffee may be an important tool to combat this. Coffee may be one of the best tools for improving liver function in general, as some studies have even suggested a protective effect of it against liver damage from toxins like acetaminophen and alcohol. While coffee is in fact a superfood, there are of course a few caveats. First off, I think coffee is definitely better taken with some food, or maybe honey and milk. Coffee will increase your metabolic rate, which means that you will need to provide more resources in order to sustain it. This means eating enough total food, protein, and nutrients. If you find yourself getting jittery or restless after a cup of coffee, it could be indicative of poor liver function. Since caffeine has to be metabolized by the liver, those with liver dysfunction will clear less of it out, leaving more available in the blood. Some studies have even suggested an oral caffeine test as a diagnosis for liver cirrhosis. Thankfully, since coffee is liver protective, the answer may just be to keep drinking it until your liver recovers. Until then, ingesting the coffee with some fat like butter or cream can help to slow down the digestion of it so you aren't bouncing off the walls. Of course, coffee can also affect your sleep if you drink it too late in the day. While blocking out adenosine signaling could have some positive effects on your overall health, it may also make it harder for you to fall asleep and stay asleep. You know how they say nothing good happens after midnight? Well, for coffee, nothing good happens after noon. If you cut it off by then you should be fine to go to bed, but you'll have to test it out for yourself. It truly is a shame that there is so much misinformation about this magical drink out there. Unfortunately, many doctors and functional medicine practitioners will tell their patients to stop drinking coffee or severely limit it based on current dogma, when it might be one of the most powerful tools to help them heal. My stance is pretty simple. If you feel like you need that cup of coffee in the morning, then you probably actually do. There's no reason to cut it out. You should still pursue optimal health so you aren't dependent on it, but if you like coffee, drink it. Don't let them fool you. Subscribe to our channel.